We welcome you to this podcast where we provide heartfelt conversations with people who have experienced the deep pain of losing a loved one to addiction. Through raw and honest stories, we explore how grief can be a path to healing, finding purpose, and even joy. Hosted by Rhonda Kemp, each episode is a gentle reminder that no one has to walk through grief alone. Together, we'll explore our own unique journeys of loving someone with substance use disorder and how faith can provide strength. We hope to break the stigma surrounding addiction and offer comfort to those in their darkest moments. Our stories will show that, especially in sorrow, God provides us with His abundant grace. Just as we honor those we've lost, share in the power of gratitude, and discover the signs that remind us we are never truly alone.
Welcome to the podcast today. I'm so happy to introduce Tuesday to our listeners. I had the privilege of spending a weekend with Tuesday in February at one of our mini mom retreats with Hope After Loss. So I've gotten to know her a little bit, and she's doing really great things in her journey. Just recently started her own Hope After Loss group to help other people suffering after losing someone to overdose or substance use disorder. So I want to let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what she's doing now and her journey in her grief.
My name is Tuesday Desrochers, and I am the mom of Maxwell, Caleb, Catherine, and Sarah Bethany. I have 2 stepchildren as well, Heather and Lindsay, and I have 8 grandchildren. My journey with addiction and substance use disorder started when I was just a kid. You know, my dad was an alcoholic, and I grew up around, so many alcoholics, so many people addicted. I then, got married, and my husband struggled with some substance use disorder, and we were married for 23 years. It was extremely difficult as a wife to deal with someone going through addiction, especially back in the 90s when we didn't know so much about it. We didn't know that it was a disease. We thought it was something like a character flaw. And so it wasn't talked about, especially in the church. I didn't bring it up with my church friends unless it came to a crisis, and then we had to talk about it. My children, Max especially, he struggled with depression a lot when he was just a young teenager, and he started to try to self-medicate at around 14 years old. I found out, we really took that very seriously, me especially, because I had seen the effects on his own dad, and I didn't want that same path for him. Unfortunately, things just progressed with Max. When he was 16, he had been on the football team at school, and we got a phone call that we needed to come and pick him up. He was drunk at school, and it was 8 o'clock in the morning. And that was where we really realized that there was a problem here, and that he wasn't just dabbling in things. He was trying to cope with life. At that point, I reached out to some adolescent treatment centers in our area, and he was hospitalized at first. They didn't know a lot about addiction, especially in children back then. And he went into these places, and he learned more tricks on how to do more drugs and how to kind of pull the wool over our eyes a little bit more. As years progressed, when he was about 18 years old, he overdosed in our home. And I remember finding him on the floor and just screaming and doing CPR and calling 911. And they got there, and he had overdosed, and it was Klonopin that he had taken. He ended up, back in rehab, and it was in and out of rehab for years. And it was just, I remember one time when I had found him, and it was so God. I had come downstairs, everyone had gone to bed, and I just felt this uneasiness. And I thought, let me just go down. And there he was on the couch, and, he was passed out, and he was turning blue. And I just called 911 again, did CPR until they got there. And when they got there, I had been so busy doing the CPR, I hadn't seen the needle. I had no idea. The police officer said to me, this is heroin. This is what we found. And I just realized, oh my God, this is a death sentence. That my child was using heroin. How unbelievable, how far he'd fallen. And, again, we tried to get him into rehab and he didn't want to go. And we couldn't have him in the home anymore with the other children. And we had to ask him to leave. And he was living in a van in a friend's driveway. And I would drive by and my heart would just break. And he would call once in a while. I'd pick him up and take him for a meal, maybe take him home to take a shower. He entered a treatment program at one point, Teen Challenge, and it's a wonderful faith-based program, but it was very strict and he just wouldn't stay. And we just kept this roller coaster of in and out of treatment centers, and it just wreaked havoc on our family. His dad and I divorced at one point, not because of Max, obviously. We just had our own issues. And Max wasn't living at home at that point, and we got a phone call one day. I got a phone call one day that he had robbed a bank, and he was in jail, and it was just the most awful thing that I could ever imagine. I remember I was in my basement when the phone call came in, and I just remember just falling to the ground and sobbing and just didn't know where to turn. How had we gotten here? He ended up pleading guilty, even though the judge said, you definitely don't want to plead guilty. You do one thing when you come out, you're going to go away for a long time. And he was always honest about his behavior. He didn't lie a lot. And he told the judge, I did it. I deserve to do the time. I did it. So he went away for 3.5 years. During that time, his brother Caleb, who had always been, the one I never had to worry about, he was Caleb, he just, everything came easy for him, and he had friends and he played sports, and he was just doing so well. Somehow he decided to start dabbling as well, and he started with pills, and his addiction was so quick, the way it changed his life. Within 3 years, he had gone from every night of the week he had something to do, with friends, to every night of the week he was home alone in his room in the basement, didn't want to come up even for meals. And this was so unlike him. He had never been depressed, and he was so depressed. He came to us, my now husband and I, and said, I have a problem and I need to go to treatment. And so I brought him to a place in our area called Star and checked him in. And, I just remember looking through the little window as I was walking out, and he was, sitting there being checked in, and he just was just so broken and so just sobbing. And I just can't get that visual out of my head. Unfortunately, with Caleb, he got out and he just continued to use and continued to use. He decided at another time he was going to go get treatment. This was about a year later. And so we were able to get him into a treatment center, and then into the next step down. We had our family meeting, and at the family meeting, they gave us a list, and they said, this is the next step. Here's some sober houses, and these are the ones in our area. And Caleb had a friend in a town down the Cape called Falmouth, and he said, "Oh, there's a sober house there. I want to go there." And it seemed like a great idea. I talked to the sober house because we were going to be paying for it. And, they told us there were meetings every day, church, they had to go to church. There were all these house responsibilities, and they had to have a job. And I was like, wow, this is really structured. This is really going to work well for him. There are only a few guys in the house. And within a month, Caleb was dead. He was gone. And I thought, oh my God, we sent him there. How could this possibly have happened? Thank God he journaled. And we found in his journal that within a week, he was writing, "This place is a joke. Everybody uses every day. I use every day." And all the things that we had been told, all the lies that we had been told about the meetings and the drug testing and all those things, they were just not true. Wow. They were a house of people that had been addicted, and they were living together. And guess what they did? They used drugs together. It was nothing like we thought it would be.
Wow. On top of all the other chaos you have to deal with, that's so disappointing.
Right. And so Max was still in jail at the time when we lost Caleb. And I remember he would call nightly, and he called, and I didn't want to tell him. It was the most horrible thing to have to say. and to not be there to hold him. And so I told him what had happened, and I just remember him screaming, and it was just so horrific. He had to come to the funeral home by himself to view his brother's body before the wake, before any of us had been there. They wouldn't tell us when. He said he came in shackles, and he stood before the coffin and said goodbye to his brother. And then he had to ride back to the prison, which was an hour and a half away, with that vision in his mind, having to face that by himself and process those things. So when Max got out, we just had such high hopes, like he was going to do so well. This is his chance. And we had a trailer in our backyard, and he got to stay in the trailer, and he was super excited. It was a 1-bedroom, but it was his own space. And he came out, and he did great for a while, but then he relapsed, and he ended up again in another treatment center. And this was the pattern over and over again, until 2023. In January of 2023 was his lowest of lows. I mean, he was using every day. We would talk every day, and he would say, "Mom, I'm not ready. I'm not ready." And every day I thought, we're going to lose him. He's going to die. One day he said, "I'm ready." And he drove himself to a treatment center. And from there, he asked me to pick him up and take him to Teen Challenge again. He said, "I'm going to do it this time. This is it. I'm going to do it." And unfortunately, he left Teen Challenge again, and he came home. We had some great times together. He stayed with us for about a month, and he was clean, and he went to church every day, went to Bible study, went to his crew, which was this crew of people within our church that are in recovery. And he just made some really great friends. He picked up again, and he didn't have anything in his system, and he died instantly. He had 2 types of fentanyl in his system when we lost him. And I just remember waking up, seeing all those missed calls from his fiance, and just knowing what had happened before I even placed the call. That was their journey with addiction, our family's journey with addiction.
How old was Max when he passed?
Max was 33, and Caleb was 24.
24. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure people are sitting there asking themselves, how do you get through that? How do you lose 2 children to such a horrible disease? And the roller coaster ride you've been on with them through addiction is painful, and you have to alter your motherhood so much, loving someone in addiction. We can't love on them like we do when they're 10 years old, and
Right.
Their true personality is always showing, and it's just such a rocky road to travel. But how do you get through it?
It's my faith. It's my faith in Jesus Christ, and just my belief, that, like the word says, that it's our faith in what we can't see and the things that we hope for. I know that my boys are in paradise today. Mm-hmm. And I know it's just a matter of time until I'll be there with them. And that I try to keep in my forefront of my mind. They're not suffering anymore. The shame is gone. The pain is gone. They are free. And, that gets me through most of my days.
That promise is what we hang on to, isn't it? We will see them
Yes.
again. And it's so nice you got to have those times with Max before he passed, like the real person was there with you without all of that other nonsense that goes along with the addiction. And it's so good you got to have good memories from that time. And I know I talked to several people on this podcast, and they had that little window of time between a rehab and being clean, and they just get their kid back for a while.
Right.
And so what was Max like, and just who he was, if you want to share a little bit? I'm going to show a picture of Max while you're talking.
Sure. So Max was a gentle giant. He's 6'4", and just this giant lumberjack guy. And he was so incredibly gentle. He loved his children. He was just such a proud father. And he
Yeah.
was so natural with them. There was no awkwardness at all. Even when Holden was an infant, I just remember how he was just so naturally nurturing, and it just made me incredibly proud. He had a heart for the elderly. He had a heart for anyone with disabilities, anyone who was being left out, because he had been the underdog for so long. He would go in, see someone that was struggling or someone that wasn't being included, and he'd just go right up to him and bring him in. And he was just that kind of guy. He was fun and he was silly, and he loved to do silly things with his big old body, and he would
Yeah, he was. He
jump
was
around and chase the
very
kids, and he
tall.
was amazing. Yeah.
So you have so much pride when you talk about him. And when
Hmm.
you think of that person you were gifted with for the short time
Right.
you had. I mean, I have my daughter 30 years, but you have something you can be proud of and grateful for that you had him at all. That's the way
Right.
we end up feeling it. And this is another picture of Max here, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There he is. He had the greatest smile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very sweet. And then Caleb, what was he like?
Caleb was just so peaceful. If you were around him, he just was just this like hippie, like this aura thing about him. Everyone just loved being around him, and he had so many friends, and he was so proud of his friends when they would accomplish something or they would set a goal and meet that goal. He would just be their cheerleader.
Hmm.
He loved music, and he was always introducing me to new music. At the time, it was like Lumineers and Noah and the Whale. And he played the guitar all the time. He went all the time with that guitar wherever he went. You'd see him walking down the street barefoot with a guitar over his shoulder.
Really?
And
Was
he
he
was just
good?
so much fun. Yeah, he
Yeah.
was good. Yeah.
Yeah.
His favorite place to play was the bathroom because of the acoustics.
Right. Only a musician would know that.
Right.
They're both so handsome too. And
Thank you.
yeah. And in your journey, what year did you lose Caleb?
2017.
Okay. So you're talking about 8 years since that
Yes.
loss. How has it changed for you in who you are and how you view things since before that time compared?
It really made me stop and think about what's important. My
Mm.
family, it's so important, and spending time together. And I think of the times that he had asked me, hey, Mom, why don't you come visit me in Boston? He was living in Boston for a while. And I went once, but I could have gone so many more times if I'd have made the time, if I'd have put away, things that don't really matter and made the time for that. Um, Also made me fearless. The worst has happened. I'm not afraid of anything anymore.
Mm.
What do I have to fear? I've lost my children. There's nothing worse than that.
Yeah.
Um, it's made me more loving. I say the things that need to be said at the time instead of waiting. If I think someone is doing a great job, I'm going to tell them. If I think they look beautiful that day, I want to tell them. If I am just so grateful for their friendship, I make sure to tell them, because we just never know. And
Maybe
losing
that's
Caleb,
what the scripture is talking about. Blessed are those who mourn. We do get brightness in it somehow.
we
Just
do.
like you're saying, you don't ever waste an opportunity to do what's important. And some people live their whole lives and never share what's important to people around them. So it's opened your eyes to really what life's all about. And the fearless, I love that. I love the story, the word fearless. After I lost Lacey, I went to a theme park and they had this ride that they had to shut up down eventually in Kansas City, Schlitterbaum, I think it was called. But it literally like took you airborne in this little toboggan thing and you went straight down. I would have never gotten on that thing before. But a friend that I was with said he was a young kid. He's like, you need to go with me. And I was like, okay, I don't care.
Right,
Nothing
right,
worse can be than, how I
right,
woke up this morning without my daughter. So I did it. And it's just crazy how you're changing your whole your whole level of what's important to you just completely shifts.
Right.
It's just,
Right.
yeah, yeah. So you really do look at life a lot differently, and I think you're open to other people's agony too in a different way.
Right.
So you've told us a little bit about your sons and what you're doing now. Has your career changed or anything since you've lost the two boys, or were you always an artist?
I was always an artist. I did notice that when I lost Caleb, especially, I was able to focus in on my work more and pour myself into it. And somehow it's just been this release. When I'm painting, I don't really think. I just get to just be there. And I get to interact with the people that walk by. I do a lot of window art, and it's a lot of fun to stop and talk to people. And I've just found that, what I get to do is a blessing. And how dare I take that for granted? And there are days, sorry, my dog's going to bark. I need to let him out.
Okay.
There are days when I don't want to go to work, but the days that I go to work and really think about the boys, sometimes things just come out so much better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is one of the things that I've looked up on your Facebook page. That's
One of my
the window
laundromats.
art you're talking about. So it's
Right.
like a mural on a storefront window, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Right.
so neat and so fun to do, I bet. So
Yeah, it
creative.
is. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's cool. And do you do just locally, or do you get to travel and do this too?
I've traveled to, let's see, New Hampshire, Maine. That's a couple hours away.
Uh-huh.
Connecticut. I've traveled to Tampa, Florida, a couple of times, and I've even gone to Africa with our
Oh,
church. Yeah, our church has
good.
some missions that I've been able to go on, and I go over there and I paint, which is really fun.
Oh, I bet that's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you're having a hard day now, what's something that you do maybe that other people haven't found to give yourself some hope or relief from the pain? Because I know you still are dealing with the loss. I mean, you wake up every day with
Right.
it, and even though you're productive and you're doing good things and you smile and laugh, there's got to be those days and moments where you feel kind of back down in that hole that we were in.
Right. So I will oftentimes go for a hike. I feel really close to my sons in the woods, and it's always been one of my favorite places to go. So we have a lot of paths and things like that around here. We're close to the beach, so I can walk the beach, and we're close to the woods as well, which I love.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'll pray, and sometimes I don't even have the words to pray. I just cry. And, the word says that the Spirit intercedes for us with groans, and when my heart has been too heavy to pray and I just cry out, help, God has answered me, whether it's just the moment of peace or just allowing myself to sit with my pain, which is really hard for me, and just sit and cry. I will text my husband and, we'll pray together by text. I'll call a friend. I'll do those things that have worked for me and continue to work for me. Music's a big thing for me. I've got to be careful what I listen to that can bring me down, you
Yeah.
know, um, and I try to listen to things that are more going to build me up rather than tear me apart.
And who do you call? Do you have people that have always been there for you since the day
I
one of
do.
grief? You do?
I do.
Yeah.
My best friend, Daryl, the moment that we found out about Caleb, they were at our house within 15 minutes, her husband, Bill, and her. They walked through the whole process of the funeral and, the planning and all of those things with us. And she remembers the anniversaries and she sends me a card and she'll call me or just text to see how I'm doing. And she's just my biggest cheerleader for a friend. She's just been
Yeah.
so amazing. And when
Those
we lost
people,
Max, the
yeah.
same thing. They were there immediately. So, yeah.
That's such a blessing to have those people in your life that really understand that they can show up and not just, some people are afraid of death and grief and they just don't know what to do. So they kind of avoid you. So I'm glad
Right.
you have that support. And then you found other ways. Did you find some groups, or did you go to therapy, or what did you do early on?
Early on, I went to therapy. I was seeing a therapist, and then she lost her husband. And then I just didn't feel like going there and dumping my grief on top of her grief. And so I pulled back. Um, I, now and then again, when I feel like I need a tune up, I go back to therapy. Let's see, I'm on medication now that I wasn't on before for depression, for anxiety. I don't know if you have it, but there are nights when I'll wake up and it feels like someone has shaken me awake and just the panic sets in. And of course, I'll pray and I'll try to settle myself down that way. But I've had to take some medication for that as well. And I thank God for that, because I don't know where I'd be without those things, because there have been some super dark days. And
Mm-hmm.
I've got a
Yeah,
great doctor, and she listens to me and sits with me. And I'm
good.
blessed in that as well.
Yeah, and just the fact that you go from a family of what, five? Do you have a daughter?
Yes, I have.
So,
So we have 6 children together. My husband and myself.
yeah,
And
yeah. There's
people
just
say
such a it's like an earthquake happened. You just, it's
it is
never. It's so unsettling that you look around at a holiday and your table's just two people are gone.
right.
It's hard to get your head around it for a long time, is what I felt. It takes a
Yeah,
long time to even accept that it really is real, you
right.
know.
Yeah, or
So
people
what
say,
would
"How
you
many
tell?
children do you have?" How many children do you have? And it's like I have 6. I'm not going to, and I don't. Some people, when I feel comfortable enough and I feel like it's that time to tell them, 2 of them are in heaven. But boy, you don't want to say that to the wrong person. It makes
Oh,
people very uncomfortable.
yeah. Yeah, it kind of, you can hear a pin drop when you,
Yes.
I did that recently. Actually, I had somehow the perfect answer when someone asked me how many kids I have, because it used
Yeah.
to be really hard to go explain it. And now
Right.
I found a way to say it. I have 3 kids, two sons and a daughter. My daughter's in heaven and my boys live close to me in Derby. And it just is
Oh,
an answer that really feels natural for me. And then
right.
everyone stops because she is in heaven. And,
Right.
I'm 1,000% sure of that. And she's still my daughter.
Yes, she is forever
Yeah.
and ever.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how do you honor Caleb and Max? How do you feel if they were looking down on you and could see you? What do you think they would say?
I think they would say, keep going. I've tried to use this platform that's been given to me that I certainly don't want, but I've tried to use it to honor them. I have had the opportunity to speak in some treatment centers, in some schools. I've had the opportunity for podcasts and being on the radio and things like that. And every chance I get, it's I get to talk about my boys, and that brings me so much joy. And I think that they would just say, Mom, you're doing a good job. Keep talking, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And when you go to the schools, do you just talk about your story basically, or do you have anything further in education that you're doing?
So, what I've been able to talk about with Caleb, I haven't spoken about Max in schools yet, but with Caleb, I was able to talk about the beginning when you're in high school and you're starting to use pot or you're experimenting with things. When Caleb died, he died next to his very best friend. They had been best friends since they were like 14. And this friend and a couple of other friends had invited Caleb over. They were having a little party and he was so excited. I remember him telling me he was going over there. And that night, Caleb died and his friend lived. And they both experimented with marijuana and who knows what else. They both walked the same path. Yet, this young man is not addicted. He's not struggling the way Caleb was. He's leading a productive life and he's got a career. And here's Caleb. He tried the same thing, but boy, was his path so different. And look how it ended. And so I try to explain to the kids, you don't know if you're either one. Which one are you? You don't want to take that chance. If you have it in your mind that, hey, that could happen to me, I could be the one who goes down that path and never comes back. And so I just try to instill in them that, you know, this is my son, Ben. Look at this guy, handsome, popular,
Beautiful.
like he had it
Beautiful.
going on,
Yeah.
and who would ever think that he would end up the way that he did?
No,
And I just want
no,
kids to think about that.
you would have never looked at him in the fifth, sixth grade and said, "This is a kid I have to worry about." It just,
Nope, never.
it's addiction, and addiction is a brain disorder, and we don't always know that as moms when we're going through it. So you might do everything wrong, because you don't know
Right.
about addiction. So I always tell parents now, educate yourself about all of this just in
Mm-hmm.
case. You might have one child that goes through it. And if I would have known more about the disease and what it was changing in my daughter's brain and her body and the physiology of all of it, I could have helped her so much better. It sounds like you did a good job of getting your kids into treatments and rehabs, and you did the footwork of all of that, and you stayed in contact. Um, what would you tell a parent that's dealing with it right now? What would you give their advice for that? Just how do you? Because I know we're in denial too. That was a big part of mine. Is my kid is
Right.
not going to be a drug addict.
Nope.
Even if it's right in front of your face, you just keep saying that.
Right. I would say, love them where they're at. They do not love themselves when they're in addiction. They're not the person that they thought they would be. Loving them where they're at could mean something like taking them to their next appointment. It could mean bringing them a meal. Hey, do you want to come home and take a shower? Love them where they're at. And I feel like the more I loved my boys, the more they were honest with me about their addiction.
Yeah.
It was when I was judging them because I didn't know enough and I was telling them to pull it together and, knock it off. That pushed them further away because they sure as heck wanted to do those things, but they didn't know how. But when I would go to them and say, it's okay if you're using, let's talk about it. They would never tell me at that point, but the door was always open. And I would just say, just love on them and do the best that you can as their parent. I'd say don't overstep. And, there's a fine line between loving them and enabling them. And you have to find out what that is for you and your family.
Yeah, that's really good. And you were able to at least look back now and say you did love them where they were. And that's a huge lift off of your shoulders, because some of us have that guilt that just
Right.
drives you into a really dark place when you think you're part of the problem. And
Mm.
sounds like you were very loving and supportive. And but there's groups like Finding Hope. That's one of the groups that I help lead too, just for the families to know how to navigate through their loved one in addiction. So there are help groups out there. Um, we both are Hope After Loss leaders. So we help
Yes.
people that are dealing with their grief after loss, but we have Finding Hope too for the families of someone in active addiction. So these stories are so important just because you're frustrated. It's upsetting your life. It upsets your marriage. It upsets your home life. It upsets your other
Everything.
children. Everything gets crumbled, and you're just trying to hold it together for that emergency that you feel like is always taking place in addiction. There's always an emergency. It feels
Always.
like. So you have this PTSD, and then you lose a child, and then you have the grief and the guilt. It's a wonder God can pick up our pieces and just put them back together the way he does, the way only he can do that.
Right. It
Yeah.
is. It's amazing that we don't die because it sure feels like in the beginning, doesn't it? That
Yeah.
we're not going to make it through it.
Yeah. Yeah. Those dark days, and they last a long time for some people, and some people move through it a little differently. But it was years before I thought I could really pick myself up and start something in my life that would look a little bit more normal, just like you're carrying around this big weight with you in grief, and you don't ever get to set
Yes.
it down.
No.
It's just always there. And so there are ways to navigate, but I always say, without God showing me that he would give me peace and he would give me relief when I absolutely had to have it. And I
Right.
think he knows how to just pick you up and carry you in it. And so thankful for our faith that we have that.
I am too.
Yeah. So what's your plan for the future? You're growing your Hope After Loss group. You're doing your art. Do you have anything else coming down the pike
I
that you?
write. So I've been writing. I try to write down stories about my sons, and it's so much fun to relive those memories. They were crazy. The Bethany boys were wild, and they were just 2 years apart. And I start started telling the stories to my grandchildren, and they're, tell us another one, tell us another one. No, not when they're old, when they're young and naughty. So I'm working on a book about my grief and about how God has brought me through that. But now I have this other idea of, oh, this would be a pretty good children's series, or
Yeah.
little children's book about the boys, the
Mhm.
Bethany boys, as I like to call them. Yeah,
That's
so those are some
great.
things I'm working on.
Oh, I love that. That will be
Yeah.
good to read, and bringing the
Mhm.
kids into it too. They
Right.
need to know. And I'm just really proud that you can do so much. And
Thank
it's
you.
just been a couple years since you lost Max, so you're kind of soaring on those wings, like it says in Isaiah. You're
Right.
just
Yes,
you're being healed, and helping other people, I think, is a big part of that too.
it definitely is.
Yeah. So, you feel like you're living the best that you can live. I mean, that kind of sounds like you're using all your talents, and that's what is demanded of us, I think, is just to use the talents we have.
Yes, it
So,
is.
what's the thing you miss most about them? And we'll close with that.
Oh, with Caleb, he had this way. My boys were both very tall. He would pull me in for a hug, but he was always put his hand on top of my head. And when he did that, he would say, I love you, Mama. I love you so
Oh,
much, Mom. And then he'd wrap me in this big hug. And I miss that so much. And he just had this chuckle. You never knew if he was laughing at you or with you. And I miss that so much, and he had this twinkle in his eye. I miss the way he would burst into a room, and he was like Kramer from Seinfeld. And he loved things like, I miss how much he loved pancakes. He would eat pancakes every single day if he could. Miss his, he used to steal my husband's socks. And one one of the funny things, when we went to clean out his drawers, and he would always say, I don't have your socks. I don't have your socks. We went to clean out his drawers from the sober house, and guess what we found in the top drawer? A drawer full of my husband's socks. And it was like, it was like, Caleb was just like laughing at us at that point.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
kind of a
he was
little
just
God. When you get those real clear visions of who they were like that,
right.
it
Yeah,
feels like they're right there with you.
right. And another thing that happened when he had been using my computer before he died, and I just didn't have time to go on it. So one day I said, "Oh, let me go on there," and I opened it up, and the screen popped up, and he had set it as his own face and making a cross-eyed face, and I just laughed. I said, it was one of those days when I needed one of those God winks, and there it was, and it was just so
Yeah.
funny, and he was still playing jokes on me.
Oh, that's
Oh boy! And with Max, I just miss the way he looked at me. No one looked at me like Max looked at me. There was just adoration in his eyes, and I miss that so much. And I miss the way he'd say I'm a mama's boy, and he didn't care who knew it. He had me in his phone as mama. Even his boss had my phone. He said, I have you in my phone as Max's mama, because he talked about you all the time. Um, I
uh,
miss watching him be a parent. He was just so good at it. And I miss the love that I saw him pouring in. Breaks my heart that they don't.
somehow this thing is acting up. I'm sorry. Let's keep going. Um, no, those are such great visuals that you you describe them like they were just here this morning. It's yeah, it's really, I don't really think death is what we picture it being. I just think they're so close. Their spirit can be so close to us, even though they're physically not here. So I love those descriptions. Oh,
Know what happened there.
I don't know where'd you
I don't
go?
know. So what you were saying about how they're physically not here, but we can feel so close to them. For me, it's during worship at church when my hands are raised and where I'm praising the Lord. I know at that same time my boys are doing the same thing. And it's like this
Mm,
connection to heaven, and I feel so incredibly close to them. And it's just,
mm.
I love it. When I go to the altar, I picture them with Jesus and just the love that they must be feeling now, and just the
Yeah,
peace. Yeah,
it's so beautiful. And that spiritual
right,
connection. And we're never closer, I don't think, to anyone than we are our
right.
children. They're just part of who we
Mm-hmm.
are. And feeling them close by is just such a
It
gift.
is.
There's a video on YouTube of a girl, probably in her early 20s, flying up, like running up this big flight of stairs. Have you seen
No.
it? Jesus is at the top of the stairs with his arms
Yeah.
out, and she's running, like full-fledged running up this stairway. And it just is so good for me to see that sometimes,
Right.
because that's how I picture Lacey entering into
Mm.
heaven, like running into his arms, and he gives her this huge
Yep.
hug. You have to look
I
it up.
will. I'll
This
check
girl
that
with
out for
the
sure.
staircase. That's what our kids were able to do before we could.
Mm.
So for some reason, God had it planned that they needed to be coming home early,
Right.
and I don't think it's totally his will that they were in
Mm-hmm.
addiction. I don't agree with that, but I think because he knows them so well, he knows when they're coming,
Right.
and he had a plan. So this is all still part of their
Yes,
plan.
it is.
And thank you for being so brave and fearless. When I think of Tuesday, I'm going to think of fearless.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for allowing me to talk about my sons.
Yeah, I so appreciate it. And keep doing all the good stuff you're doing. I know you will. And I'll see you again, maybe in October.
Okay. Sounds great.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Tuesday. I appreciate
Thanks.
you.
Thank you for joining us on the Grief, Grace, and Gratitude podcast with Rhonda Kemp. What a powerful message to hear from Tuesday. We are so thankful for her ability and willingness to be vulnerable and share her story with us. If you have a story and you'd like to share it, please look at the show notes and fill out our form, and we'd love to spread this news to everyone. Thank you again for joining our podcast.